Bitty beep, bitty beep. Hello, welcome to the Court of the EDI Jester. How are we, everybody? Right, today, become a warrior teacher. Like this, subscribe, do the usual, buy me a coffee, onwards. Okay, so, this is actually serious, right? So it's serious that you understand it, I think. If you don't want to engage, don't. I know you won't, right? But I think it's serious. Let's have a moment's silence for seriousness. There's a document on East Tennessee State University, which was reviewed and revised in July 2023. And it talks to us about paraphilias and paraphilic disorders. And that's something we need to get our head around. It's strange how, in recognising what's happened over the last 60 years, in recognising what's happened since the idea of gender identity and gender ideology was introduced by organisations like the Beaumont Society into our society, it has done nothing but untold damage at a granular level and at a policy level and law level. Untold damage. If you go back to 2004, when they passed the ridiculous Gender Recognition Act, which in retrospect should never have been passed, it's easy for us to say that now, there were people warning about that. You can read it in Hansard. Warning about what the effects of doing this would have, what sort of things needed to be answered. And they tried, in the best way that they were able to do with the information they had to hand at the time, to introduce something that they thought was there to help a very, very tiny minority of people whom they thought had something that this was a possible alleviator of, that being the concept of gender dysphoria. I now, in my research, and I know many others, Dr. M is one, Dr. P is another, Miriam Grossman, Amy D'Souza, many of the people involved in this, many of the men involved in it, James Estes, will be looking at this through different lenses, but the first thing to understand is that most people are beginning to realise there is no such thing as gender dysphoria. It simply is not a thing. It's a construct. It's actually, if anything, it's a body integrity disorder. They've got a problem with their own body. Nobody in their right mind would say that somebody was well if they came up to you and said, I'd like to cut my arm off. But yeah, we've got people that do that. I don't think it's any different to that, but with a layer of sex and sex on it, on top of it, and desire and eroticism, right? So it's important that we understand paraphilia. So this particular article, which is in the Dubris, allows us to take a look at exactly what it means. So let's go through a little bit of it. Paraphilias involve sexual arousal to atypical objects, situations, and or targets. For example, children, corpses, or animals. However, some paraphilias that seem unusual to another person do not rise to the level of a paraphilic disorder simply because they are unusual. People may have paraphilic interests but not meet the criteria for a paraphilic disorder. The way that I see this, and I'm more than happy to be put wrong about it, is it's like when your fetish gets out of control as a paraphilia. So I've got my fetishes. They're not particularly, I'm very vanilla. In the words of Grindr. In the words of gay sex, I'm as vanilla as they come, right? So I'm not, give me, are we done yet? Can I have a cup of tea? Sandwich. Other people are like, no, come on, insert X or touch X or do, or whatever. Get the wire. Have you brought the mask? Fine. If your fetish is in your bedroom, nobody cares. So I see it as fetish to paraphilia, but they're talking about paraphilic disorders. How does that work? The unconventional sexual arousal patterns in paraphilias are considered pathologic disorders only when both of the following apply. They are intense and persistent. They cause significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, or they harm or have the potential to harm others, children and non-consenting adults. Do you see where this is going? People with a paraphilic disorder may have an impaired or non-existent capacity for affectionate reciprocal, emotional and sexual intimacy with a consenting partner. Other aspects of personal and emotional adjustment may be impaired as well. The pattern of disturbed erotic arousal is usually fairly well developed before puberty. Now, this is the one that's going to cause absolute ructions before puberty. Now, this is interesting. Anxiety or early emotional trauma interferes with the normal psychosexual development. The standard pattern of arousal is replaced by another pattern, sometimes through early exposure to highly charged sexual experiences that reinforce the person's unusual experience of sexual pleasure. So that's an interesting one, because as far as I'm aware, when they mean before puberty, they mean before puberty and after puberty. So there's a definite line, because you become sexually aware whenever whenever the game starts. We all know what that is, right? So it might be 12, it might be 13. You're already able to experience sexual desire at that point, right? But that sexual desire becomes damaged. You may remember the story of the man who murdered many gay men. They called him the kindly killer, Dennis Nielsen. Now, Clive has done a great piece on Nielsen on his channel, The Queen's Speech. You'll see there his work with serial killers. So there's something happened there with his grandfather's his dead grandfather's body that completely twisted this bloke, right? Completely twisted him. So it becomes, the first thing is a trauma interferes with us. That trauma can happen at any time. The standard pattern of arousal is replaced by another pattern, sometimes through early exposure to highly charged sexual experiences that reinforce the person's unusual experience of sexual pleasure. In other words, abuse of some kind. Might not be, could just be a confluence of events that lead to this. The pattern of sexual arousal often acquires symbolic and conditioning elements. As an example, a fetish symbolizes the object of arousal, but may have been chosen because the fetish was accidentally associated with sexual curiosity, desire, and excitement. It is controversial whether all paraphilic development results from these psychodynamic processes. Notice what they're saying there. It is controversial, meaning it is not confirmed in any way, meaning this is just another hypothesis. Interesting. And some evidence of altered brain function and functional anatomy is present in some paraphilias. And they've got here, for example, paedophilia. In most cultures, paraphilias are far more common amongst males. Biological reasons for the unequal distribution may exist, but are poorly defined. What they're saying is, we don't understand this stuff. We're fumbling about in the dark. Well, was it something that happened to you when you were a child? Was it something that happened to you when you're an adult? As a young man, I grew up, and then when I hit about 12, 13 years old, I suddenly thought, oh, hello, one likes the knob. And that was it. My childhood was over at that point because the bullying was so intense, but just because I was unaccepted. It was unaccepted at that time to be that. There was no such thing. So I had to, learn to live with it, like many did. And then, gay rights, all the stuff came forward. So that's like a normal development thing, isn't it? I fancy men. That's it. It's not complicated. This is not that. And they're saying in this article that the evidence is scant for understanding it. Scant for understanding it. Dozens of paraphilias have been described, but most are uncommon or rare. I saw a woman once who wanted to marry a train station. Very rare. Yeah, thank God it's rare. Can you imagine? Here are the most common paraphilic disorders. Voyeuristic disorder. Peeping Toms, as we used to call them. Good film, Peeping Tom, by the way, very scary. Exhibitionist disorder. Woo! Flashers, right? Frotteristic disorder. I think that's about rubbing your knob up against things. So you get sort of overcome by a terrible frotter feeling. And suddenly you're rubbing your knob up against the corner of Tesco's meat counter. Frotteristic. Sexual masochism disorder, fairly obvious. Sexual sadism disorder, that's more dangerous, obviously, because it's dangerous to the other individual. Pedophilic disorder, dangerous to the child. Fetishistic disorder, that's an interesting one. And transvestic disorder. Fetishistic disorder is when, for example, in order to get off, you need the dishcloth on your knee. So they fetishize an individual thing. or a bra, or a pair of knickers, or a silky lacen undergarment. That's fetishistic disorder. And then you have transvestic disorder. Transvestism involves recurrent and intense sexual arousal from cross-dressing, which may manifest as fantasies, urges, or behaviours. It causes significant distress or functional impairment in one or more areas of their life. Some paraphilias, such as pedophilia, frotteurism, voyeurism, some forms of exhibitionism, are illegal and may result in imprisonment and lifelong registration as a sex offender. Some of these offenders also have significant personality disorders and antisocial narcissistic personality disorder, which makes treatment difficult. Often more than one paraphiliac disorder is present. For clinicians who treat patients with paraphilic disorders, guidelines are available regarding pharmacology. So, what we've got here is a document that is speaking from a psychomedical position. That's the first thing you've got to understand. They're not saying anything of any of this is okay. They're not saying any of it is fixed in stone. This is where we are with the hypothesis. Updated June 2023. My hypothesis is that if you're practicing your fetish in public, it has become paraphilia. And in time, that you will end up with, obtain and forced into yourself a paraphilic disorder. In which case, the current trans movement is a time bomb just waiting to go off. But you let me know. Remember, medical documentation here. We're in the argot of medicine. We're not talking about every day. This is what they're saying in the argot of medicine. So pinch of salt, hypothesis, possibilities, cold, hard analysis of where they're at. Not emotional, bring them down. This is actually people trying to think about what's happening. So go and have a read. I think it's very interesting. There's lots of links in there for you to follow. It's time we understood what a paraphilia is, what a paraphilic disorder is, and what a fetish is. Because then we can start going, this needs to stop, and prove why. Because they're all getting off on it. I'll see you later. Have fun. I don't mean fun. Not with this. Go do some serious reading. I'll see you later.